The sea was quiet. The wind was cold and strong. A small English ship stopped near the coast of Massachusetts. On that ship were about 100 people, tired, hungry, but full of hope. They wanted a place where they could live freely. So they built a small village and named it Plymouth. In the last episode, we saw how a brave girl named Pocahontas saved the first British colony, Jamestown, and started the story of British America. But today's story is different. It is about how hope met hunger, how friendship turned into faith, and how the first Thanksgiving was born, out of both kindness and war. You are watching Next Frame Talks, and this is History of America. Not far from there lived a great Native American tribe, the Pokanoket. One day, a man from that tribe walked straight into the English camp and said, "Hello." The settlers were shocked. How could a native man speak perfect English? That one simple word, hello, hides a secret that America rarely tells its children. It's a story buried deep beneath the beautiful festival of Thanksgiving. In this final episode of History of America, we shall uncover the real beginning of the American story, a story of faith, friendship, and betrayal. Now you must be wondering, who were these people who crossed the ocean to such an unknown world? They weren't soldiers or conquerors. They were families, English Christians known as pilgrims. In 1620, these pilgrims left the port of Plymouth in England on a small ship called the Mayflower. They were escaping religious persecution and dreaming of a land where they could freely follow their faith. For 65 long days, the Mayflower fought against wild waves, hunger and fear. Finally, in December 1620, it anchored near the freezing coast of Massachusetts. Before stepping on this new land, they made an agreement among themselves. They would make their own laws but still stay loyal to the King of England. That small promise became the foundation of what would one day turn into a new nation. But you might ask, what kind of welcome did they get in this new world? Let me tell you, it was terrible. The cold winds cut through their wooden huts like knives. The sandy soil refused to grow crops. Food ran out, and soon diseases spread. Within a few months, half of them had died. Mothers buried their children. Husbands buried their wives. The rest could only pray for a miracle. And one day, that miracle arrived, but not from the sky. Now let me tell you who came to their rescue. From the nearby forests came the Pokanoket tribe, led by Chief Massasoit. One of his men, Samoset, knew a few words of English. He had learned them from fishermen who had once visited the coast. He smiled, walked up to the starving settlers and said again, "Hello." That one word changed everything. The natives gave them food. They taught them how to grow crops in the sandy soil by burying fish under the ground to make it fertile. Soon, golden cornfields surrounded Plymouth. The settlers called it a blessing from God. In return, they promised friendship and agreed to help the Pokanoket tribe against their enemies. For a while, peace had finally come. But as history has shown again and again, peace never lasts long. Now you may be thinking, how did this friendship turn into a festival? Here's how it happened. When the first corn harvest was ready, the settlers decided to celebrate. They invited Chief Massasoit and his people to a 3-day feast. 90 natives came, bringing deer and fruits. The settlers served turkey, bread, and ale. They laughed, sang, and played games together, two worlds sitting around one table. That celebration would later be remembered as Thanksgiving. But behind those smiles was a dark truth. Just days before that feast, the same settlers had joined the Pokanoket in attacking another tribe, burning their village and killing many people in their sleep. So the first Thanksgiving was celebrated over the graves of the dead. The settlers thanked God for their survival, but the ground beneath them was soaked in blood. Now let's move forward, because peace never stays forever in history. You may ask, when did gratitude turn into greed? With every passing year, more ships came from England. The British settlers grew stronger, richer, and prouder. The tribes who once saved their lives were now seen as obstacles in their way. Lands were taken. Promises were broken. And soon the British even began enslaving the same natives who had once fed them. Then came the year 1636. British soldiers, led by John Mason, attacked a powerful tribe called the Pequots. They surrounded an entire village at night and set it on fire. Inside were hundreds of men, women, and children, all burned alive. Later, Commander Mason proudly wrote, "God was laughing at the enemies of his people." The Pequot tribe was wiped off the face of the earth. Their villages were destroyed, their name erased from maps, their river renamed the Thames, and their town renamed New London, the same name that still exists today. That massacre proved one thing. The British hadn't come for friendship, they had come to rule. Now you might be thinking, did the natives ever fight back? Yes, they did. And their final fight shook all of New England. When Chief Massasoit died, his elder son Alexander was accused of plotting against the settlers. He was arrested and died in British custody. After him, his brother Metacom, whom the English called King Philip, became the leader. At first, King Philip tried to keep the peace. But the settlers didn't stop. They kept taking more land, insulting his people, and even hanged 3 of his men without a fair trial. That was the last straw. In 1675, King Philip decided to fight back. It was not just a war, it was a war for survival. History remembers it as King Philip's War. And now let me tell you how brutal that war really was. The natives fought with unmatched courage, bows and arrows against guns and bullets. They destroyed many British settlements and, for a time, pushed the colonists back. But the British had more men, more weapons, and even used some native tribes as allies. One by one, Philip's villages were burned to ashes. British priests called this destruction God's justice. The forests of New England were filled with smoke and the cries of people who had lost everything. In 1676, Philip's wife and little son were captured and sold as slaves. Soon after, Philip himself was betrayed and killed, not by the British, but by a native who had joined them. His body was cut into pieces. His head was placed on a spear outside Plymouth, and it stayed there for 25 years. The settlers celebrated his death as another Thanksgiving. Yes, the same day of gratitude had turned into a day of revenge. That is the secret America still hides, that Thanksgiving was born from both kindness and cruelty. Now let's move ahead, because what happened after this war changed everything. With the native tribes crushed and their lands taken, the British colonies began to grow fast. In less than 100 years, 13 colonies stretched along the American coast. New towns appeared, the population rose quickly, and more settlers kept coming from Europe. By the middle of the 1700s, Britain had fought and defeated both France and Spain in the 7 Years' War. It took control of Canada and most of North America. This was the height of the British Empire. Its power seemed unstoppable. But as always, when pride grows too high, history turns again. Now you might be wondering, how did this mighty empire lose control of its own colonies? Well, wars may bring glory, but they also bring debt. To recover its losses, Britain started imposing heavy taxes on its American colonies, especially on imported tea. But there was one problem. The Americans had no voice in the British Parliament. They were forced to pay, but had no say. Then came another blow. Britain stopped settlers from moving into new lands, the same lands that once belonged to the native tribes. The colonists were furious. They saw it as betrayal by their own king. Their anger first exploded in Boston, just 70 kilometers from Old Plymouth. A painting printed in a Boston newspaper showed British soldiers firing on unarmed citizens. That image spread like fire, and it lit the flames of rebellion. Protests began, then riots. And those riots soon turned into a revolution. Out of those flames rose a brand new nation, the United States of America. And now let's return to the question we began with. What is the real truth behind Thanksgiving? It started as a moment of gratitude and ended as a story of grief. It was born from sea, but buried in betrayal. Today, Americans celebrate Thanksgiving as a day of family, food, and joy. But the descendants of those native tribes remember it very differently. For them, it is a day of mourning, because the feast that once united two peoples became the story that erased one of them from history. So that was how America truly began, from a ship called the Mayflower to a feast called Thanksgiving, to wars, rebellion, and finally the dream of freedom. Today, the United States celebrates Thanksgiving Day every year on the fourth Thursday of November. It is a national holiday, a day when families come together, share food, and give thanks for what they have. But few remember how this tradition began, with that first feast in Plymouth almost 400 years ago. And remember, this is not the end, it's just the beginning. In the next episode of History of America, we will explore how the Great American Revolution began, the fight that changed the world. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do it now. We bring you history in a simple and interesting way, and your comments and subscriptions really encourage us to keep going. And if you missed the earlier parts of History of America, go to our channel and watch them too, so you can see the complete story from the start.